Greetings, Uncle Travelling Matt here, reporting on day 6 of my trip to Bulgaria. So, what happened? Well, up at about 9:30ish and out and heading north. The aim was to get to Ruse, stopped somewhere for breakfast, so I had the bannock and Iran, and Alex tried Boza for the first time ever, which Boza is this kind of, I'm not quite sure what it is. It doesn't do it for me. It's this fermented drink. I believe it's like mildly alcoholic, a bit like Kvass is, but it's a bit sweet for me. But Alex tried it and he liked it, and it's a staple not just of Bulgaria but all this kind of region. So we stuck with the Iran. Anyway, headed on and heading north towards Ruse, and saw signs for a place called Nikopolis ad Istrum, which is a Roman city. Now, it wasn't on the itinerary. When I asked Alex, because it's the kind of place he would put on an itinerary, he said, well, he thought we'd had enough on for the day, so that's why he hadn't added it. But decided to make the detour, only about 3 kilometres off the main road, but by God, the road was absolutely awful. It was a really, I thought it was doing some serious damage to the car. But anyway, got there, really hot, and were the only tourists. And in fact, there wasn't even any staff there. The ticket office was deserted. But just as we were about to walk in, the lady did come, so we bought tickets. Anyway, Nikopolis ad Istrum is a Roman city, and it's interesting. Like we basically had a Roman city to ourselves, and it was not the best Roman city I've ever been to, but it was far from being the worst. And it's kind of interesting how you look at these things, because if I'd have come there as a kid and never been to a Roman city before, it would have blown my mind as to how incredible it was. The problem is, as you get older, you see more and you get a bit jaded, and compared to like Jerash and Unkais in Jordan that we've both been to, it's it's not on that level, but it's still a pretty good one. And you might remember last year I was talking about when we went to Salamis, and we were both a tad disappointed because we'd been hyped up. And this, we weren't disappointed. We were pleasantly surprised because there was no hype to it. It was just, a chance, like a serendipitous visit off the side of the road. And we had this pretty cool Roman city. We were walking down Roman streets and, exploring the old Forum. And there was an Odeum, which is like a smaller theatre and stuff. And it was really good and not bad state of preservation. What was different to a lot of the other Roman cities I've been to is that a lot of the paving slabs from the street were kind of all like caved in or turned up. And of course, the difference was it's an earthquake zone, and so earthquakes did as much damage to Nikopolis as anything else. But it was a city built by... was it Trajan, I think? Anyway, it was built by him. I will put the link to the details in the chat, but it was built after they conquered Dacia, which is like Romania, and of course over the Danube. So the Danube was the frontier of the Roman Empire, and they built this city to kind of house veterans. So you had to have people, really ethnically mixed city, like people from Spain, people from Dacia, people from all over the Roman Empire. When they retired, this is the kind of place they'd settle, and the idea was that it strengthened Rome's presence on the border. So if the Dacians rebelled, then there's a city nearby that can help strengthen that border area if people cross the of the Danube. A little bit, I guess, in some ways, as if the Danube was Hadrian's Wall, and it was some of those cities just south of Hadrian's Wall that I've been to. So, really interesting. And, well worth stopping at. So, went there, and then carried on, and our aim was to go to the Ivanovo rock churches, but... we made another detour because it was... Alex said, well, if you like that little stop, why not try this one? And it was Cherven Fortress. Cherven Fortress, it was very near the rock churches. and in a very dramatic setting. And it is a fortress, but it's more a city that was built on a kind of peninsula of rock with the river flowing deep below, so it was a really naturally defended position. The nearest thing I can think of it is actually Veliko Turnovo, and in terms of the geography, it was quite similar, and similar time. It was a city from the Bulgarian kingdom. I think it was the second Bulgarian kingdom, so it was a medieval city, and it was sacked by the Turks and basically abandoned. But unlike Turnovo, it was somewhere that, although the city itself was ruined, when you looked out from the ramparts, it was the view you saw was almost what the medieval people would have seen, because it's a largely uninhabited area. There is a modern town of Cherven, and Cherven means red. I'm not quite sure why, because I expected red rocks maybe, but no. I'm not quite sure why it's called that, but you had to climb up. I think it was 280 steps to get to it, and then you go through the gateway, and not badly preserved, and then you're in this fortress, and it was a pretty damn good castle. Again, I'm reminded a lot of like some of the Albanian castles I went to, the one at Leje or Rozafa Fortress, and I think it was probably on a par with them. There were churches that, a bit like the ones at Trapitza, they were more like the outline on the ground, but there was a bit, a couple of foot of walls and that. So there was a couple of impressive remains of churches. There was a tower as well, and another gateway that led down towards the towards the bottom of the valley. But it was just nice wandering around, and whilst I was there, I composed a poem. I'm not saying it's my best poem, but I think it was called "Ode to a Ruin," and it was, about how when you wander around ruins, you can, it's kind of like how when you're a kid, it's also magical, and you can imagine, the knights and the archers and the people there, and like when you're an adult, your imagination just doesn't quite do it as much. And then, of course, the reflection is that's because you're a bit of a ruin as well by that stage. So, but anyway, yeah, did that. Went down, had some lunch, kebab at the cafe, and then moved on to the Ivanovo rock churches. Now, these are famous. I think they might be a UNESCO site. When we got there was a coach arriving at the same time. So we kind of like parked up quick and walked up along. You had to walk like through the forest and then up these steps because they're on the top of a kind of ledge. Again, it seems to be the geography here very much like Cherven. It's like narrow ledge with drops on either side, and the scenery was quite spectacular there. But what we did is, because we climbed up quick and got there before them, then we had the churches to ourselves. Now, I believe there are several churches. There are also like hollows in the rock where their monks live, but there's nothing really to see there. But there are two lots of churches, I believe, but one lot was locked, and so we didn't go there. We just went to the ones that were open. And within there are two churches itself. There's the main one, and then there's a smaller one dedicated to Saint Jerome. And Saint Jerome is the saint who he pulled a thorn out of a lion's paw, and the lion became his friend. And then later in life, like they threw him to the lions, and the lion was his friend and protected him. So that was nice, and there was some frescoes of this. In the main one, I found it easy to lie on the floor and look at the frescoes because they were mostly on the ceiling, and yeah, I mean, it was interesting. The frescoes are much older than a lot of the other stuff. They're medieval, like 13th, 14th century. But then the tour group came, and so like Alex stayed in because he loves a good fresco, but I got out, and I actually talked to some people on the tour group, and they were, I thought they were an American group. They weren't. They were multinational. There were some Australians in there, mostly Americans, and they were doing a Danube and Rhine trip. So they just started. I think they'd flown into Bucharest, and then they were getting on this Danube barge, going up the Danube, then transferring to the Rhine, and then going and ending at the North Sea. And that sounded like a pretty good trip, although doing everything in a group like that, I don't think would be much fun. But I chatted to a guy who was an economist, an American economist, and he said, like, what he found interesting about the Romans is they were amazingly organized, but they weren't very innovative. And so most of the Roman Empire, there was very little innovation. They were just good at organizing, which is, it's true, but I'd never really thought about it before. Anyway, we moved on, and we went to the city of Ruse. Ruse is, I think, the fourth or fifth city of Bulgaria. It's a major one. It's a very industrial city. I've been several times, and I've never really liked it because it's just a bit of an industrial dump, if I'm honest. It always looks a bit sorry for itself. I used to spend time there because I always had to change trains there and have to have an hour or two to wait whenever I was going to and from Romania. So yeah, it was my first city in Bulgaria because the first time I flew to Bucharest and then took the train over the Friendship Bridge to Ruse, and there I had to wait a couple of hours for a passport thing in this huge and grand station in Ruse before moving on. But this time I didn't go near the railway station. Drove into the centre, parked quite easily, which is, rare in a big city, and that shows you how prosperous it is, where they don't even charge for parking. And then we had a look round. Now, Alex wanted to find the old fortress. We did actually find it later, and it was shut, but we couldn't find it initially. We went down to the riverside, and I just think like Russo's missing a trick here because they could have this like waterfront, bit like in Bucharest, not Bucharest, Belgrade, which is further up the Danube, where they've really made something of the riverfront, and like there's cafes and restaurants and people hang out there. And Ruse, they could do that, and it's quite a pretty view across the Danube and watching the boats go by. And they have actually built a footbridge from the centre and like this area with a kids' playground, but there's just nothing to do there. And I thought, well, if they put some cafes and bars and clubs and stuff there, I think it could be really lively, and it could be a really nice place to hang out. But at the moment, it's not. It's horrible. But we went into the centre over the new footbridge and called in an interesting Catholic church on the way with an exhibition of the Turin Shroud. Not many Catholics in Bulgaria, but this was quite an interesting little church. And then the centre, Ruse, I always think it's trying to be Vienna. It's trying to be Central European, probably because of where it is on the Danube. And I'd been and seen the sites before, and I was a bit sightseeing out anyway after, the three we'd done so far. So Alex wandered off to look at a museum, and I sat in the main square in Happy Bar Grill and read my book and relaxed, and it was very good fun. I enjoyed. Happy, by the way, is a Bulgarian institution. They used to have born on Christmas Day, and I think it was like 1994 or something. It was pretty soon after communism, and it actually started on in Red Square in Varna. I've been to the original Happy; it's no longer there, and it was famous because the girls always wear these bright red uniforms with extremely short skirts. I mean, it was the 90s, yeah, and now they don't. Now they wear very short skirts, but they're made of blue jeans. So anyway, progress of time. But yeah, so anyway, went to Happy, then wandered through a bit of the centre with Alex. They have tarted it up. Like, Ruse does look better than it did, I'll give it that, but it's still not my favourite set in Bulgaria. And then we drove on, along the road that runs by the Danube. Glorious light, glorious just colours, and we drove about 50 kilometres to Tutrakan, where we stay in the night. Tutrakan I've been many times before. I will talk about it more tomorrow, but basically Tutrakan is where my friend Gilbert is from, and his family, and so I've been to stay with them several times. He's in Germany now, and his mum and dad are away, so I can't see them at the moment, but it's this beautiful town on the Danube. It's an absolutely gorgeous town on the Danube with a quarter of old buildings, and it turns out a hotel, the Lodkata, which means the boat hotel, is in this quarter. They call it the fisherman's quarter, with some, nice old buildings and a little church. And after we'd settled in, we had a walk through it, and it was gorgeous. And that time of the evening, I mean, my sister-in-law's a photographer, calls it the golden hour, where the light is just gorgeous. And then we went down to the front, sat on the front, and watched the sunset over the Danube as the barges plied their way back and forth before going back to the hotel and eating suitably some fish and drinking. And it was all fantastic. It's Uncle Travelling Matt. Keep travelling.
Ой, доня, маре, доня,